I cannot say enough about the secretary. She is relentless. She will not back down on this Title IX issue. She will not back down on parental rights until this is permanently fixed.
Outstanding is a production of The Washington Stand, your source for news and commentary from a biblical worldview.
Welcome to the Outstanding Podcast. I'm your host, Casey Harper. On this podcast, we dive into top political and cultural topics from a biblical perspective. For this episode, I have Julie Hartman. She's from the Trump administration, the Department of Education. Thanks for joining us, Julie.
Thank you so much for having me, Casey.
Yes. So you've been in office 6 months, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
Kids are going back to school in August. What's different?
Oh, my gosh. So much is different.
Great.
There's a new
Tell
sheriff in town.
That's
Yes.
very true. That's very evident.
Well, something I want to start with, I'm sure that you and your audience have seen headlines about this, is our fantastic resolution agreement that we just signed with the University of Pennsylvania. I mean, talk about a change.
Educate me, please.
Yes.
I'm not.
So the University of Pennsylvania has been under fire for years for allowing famously Leah Thomas, Will Thomas, to compete in the female category.
That's the Riley Gaines.
Yes.
Okay.
And Paula
That's
Skip.
where it all started at this same school. Okay.
Exactly. And that's really when the men and women's sports issue became kind of a part of the American people's consciousness. And it's so amazing. Just about 3 weeks ago, at the time of filming this podcast, Secretary McMahon and President Trump and the Department of Education signed an agreement with UPenn where UPenn agreed to restore to all of the affected female athletes the individual records and awards that were misappropriated by that male athlete. UPenn also agreed to issue a letter of apology.
That's crazy.
To a personalized letter of apology to each of those female athletes. And UPenn has agreed to rescind its guidance, which says unlawfully that if you identify as a woman, you can compete in female categories. And they're displaying it very prominently on their athletics website. So
she won. Riley won, basically.
Yes, and Paula Scanlon, who's a UPenn, swimmer. So, I mean, look right there. I mean, over the past 4 years, this Title IX issue, as I'm sure you're aware, has just been allowed to really languish unresolved. And we have a backlog of Title IX cases that the previous administration paid no attention to. They rewrote the Title IX rule in 2024 to protect gender identity. And so you're asking what's different. It's difficult to think of a better example than what we just accomplished 3 weeks ago with UPenn.
Yeah, that's a huge one. That's kind of shocked me. What role did the administration or the DOE in particular have in that? Because I think there's some pressure on schools generally. I think there's a lot. My impression is, I've written about this, there's a lot of schools that are sort of ignoring it so far.
Yes.
And I think there's sort of a judgment day coming on that, or maybe some enforcement. I don't know. I mean, there's a random school in Washington State or something that's trying to get away with not complying and thinking they're kind of fly under the radar. So we could talk about that maybe later. But what is the mechanism by which the federal government forces compliance on this issue? Because they don't seem all to be volunteering to comply, even though the rule technically changed.
In fact, many athletic associations in particular, after President Trump's executive order in January or February saying that, hey, Title IX protects women and men on the basis of sex. Yeah. This means that men cannot compete in women's sports and occupy women's intimate facilities. A lot of schools and a lot of athletic associations said, well, we're going to follow state law as it pertains to this. But I want to call to your attention some more of these things that we've done to protect individuals' Title IX rights. You're asking what the mechanism is. Yeah. So we at the Department of Education have an Office for Civil Rights. And
the Hartman.
So Hartman is at the Department of Justice.
Oh, right.
And
of course.
The Department of Justice has its own civil rights division. By the way, HHS has its own civil rights division. So we're not the only ones, despite what many in the media would say, who have a civil rights office. But we enforce Title IX. We enforce Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race and color and national origin. And then, of course, we also do disability discrimination in addition to some other things. But so back in April, the Department of Education partnered with the Department of Justice to form what's called a Title IX Special Investigations Team. Okay. And this is so historic because, again, as I said, under the previous administration, these Title IX cases where complainants were saying that men were invading female intimate facilities, locker rooms and bathrooms, or invading female sports, those cases were just languishing unresolved. And so Secretary McMahon came in and said, you know what, we're going to partner with the Department of Justice to streamline these investigations and expedite enforcement. And so we investigated the California Department of Education and the California Interscholastic Federation.
They're kind of leading the way on this when it comes to the trans stuff, for sure.
And we found them in violation of Title IX. By the way, yours truly was a CIF athlete.
Oh, really?
In the state of California,
okay.
yes.
Okay, what sport?
Swimming and water polo.
Okay, so Riley Gaines.
Yeah. I don't think I was ever as fast as Riley Gaines, but
right.
But so we found the California Department of Education and CIF to be out of compliance. We also have these investigations into the state of Maine. We additionally found them to be out of compliance and referred them to the Department of Justice. And you mentioned Washington State. That's another Title IX Special Investigations Team probe. So again, just hearkening back to your first question, what's different? Everything is different. This is actually something that this administration is finally prioritizing to restore these rights that as women we fought for decades to achieve.
Right. So, okay, so you got the office that investigates. I didn't know there was a backlog when you came in.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not as if like Trump started this issue from scratch when he came in. There's already a lot of complaints.
Yes.
And complaints at like a lot of liberal schools too. This is not just like, this is my impression for what you're saying. It's not just like Liberty University and Hillsdale or something are, volunteering to come into alignment. It's girls, probably more so girls, that are feeling their rights are infringed upon, who are reaching out for help, ignored by the Biden administration. You guys come in, you start an investigation. But then what is the threat? Is the threat like loss of federal funding? Because ultimately that's what it comes down to, is if you don't comply, you come into alignment, like they did with Harvard and the anti-Semitism stuff. Is that the similar thing?
That's right. Yes,
okay.
It's tied to the federal government spending power. So essentially, we as the federal government cannot allow taxpayer dollars to sponsor discrimination against American students.
Right.
And that
sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, okay. So Trump did an executive order. President Trump did an executive order in January. He released a lot, and it was on this issue. I have it here, because I do research, January 20th, defending women from gender ideology, extremism, and restoring biological truth to the federal government. It seems like this was a shot across the bow on this issue. I mean, it was heavily campaigned on. I think it's one of the reasons Democrats lost is they just didn't play this issue right. There's a lot of swing districts where, ads, very potent ads about, a guy tackling your 7-year-old daughter in a football, in a soccer field or something, were, I think, very powerful, and Democrats didn't handle it well. So I think there was a mandate on this issue coming in. To me, this is really the launching of that. But legally, this issue did not start with this executive order, right? This is just, what does this executive order do? If we already have Title IX, why did we need this order? Like, what changed, or is it just undoing what Biden did? Can you explain that?
No, it's a great question. I mean, I would go back to the 2024 Title IX rule that the Biden administration attempted to enact, thanks to the litigation of many brave Republican attorney generals. The court actually struck that down. But under the Biden administration, it was their position that Title IX protects people on the basis of gender identity. And that is completely contrary to the statute. If you look at the statute, it protects on the basis of sex.
Yeah.
And its implementing regulations talk about both sexes or one sex and the other sex. So it codifies...
Very inclusive language, yeah.
Right. Well, it codifies that Title IX, that gender is binary. What a crazy idea, right? So the president's executive order was really directing the federal government to enforce Title IX as it was intended and as it is written. And that's exactly what Secretary McMahon has been doing, and she has been a champion on this issue. I'll tell you that last month, the month of June, she decided to recognize June as Title IX month.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yes.
Of course, Pride Month, famously.
Yes.
Yeah.
But to commemorate, Title IX was passed on June 23rd, 1972, and she said we should
I know that. Okay.
Yes, we should devote this month to celebrating the great progress. I mean, Secretary McMahon remembers when Title IX was passed. I remember my mother and my grandmother talking about this fight to secure our protections that we need as women. And in that month alone, we opened 2 new investigations. There was one actually we opened into the University of Wyoming for they're allegedly allowing a male to live in a female sorority. There was another investigation. This is crazy, if true, into Jefferson County Public Schools in Colorado, where the district allegedly has a policy for overnight school trips that assigns rooms based on gender identity. And there was an allegation that an 11-year-old girl would have had to share a bed on an overnight school trip with a boy because of that district's policy, alleged policy, that is. And then the UPenn agreement came just right at the end of the month. So that was pretty cool that the secretary decided to do that.
Yeah, I mean,
the month of June.
It was very sort of the era of politics we're in to make June Title IX month. Just kind of this is like a new Republican Party that is a little more aggressive, a little more in your face, a little more, I think, relevant to the media and social media, versus just always trying to take this perceived high road that's kind of boring and doesn't get things done always. But you're a female athlete, obviously. You are a female.
I am a female, yes.
Yeah.
When I walked in, if you want to tell the story, you can tell it.
She thought I was going to be a girl because my name is Casey.
I was emailing with you.
We were emailing, and clearly she's a big fan of the show. But, she's here now. You're a female athlete, and I think you're talking about the history of your family, your mother, your grandmother, loving Title IX. I think, Title IX, who wants to memorize, like, legal code names? And Title IX is, like, about as unsexy as they get when it comes to naming laws. But I think there's kind of been something lost on the history of what Title IX was about. And I think people generally don't understand how egregiously the Biden administration changed the meaning. I can't even think of a good analogy that represents it, but Title IX was basically to make sure that women could have sports in schools. And you couldn't give all the money to the football team and then, give like the girls' soccer team like $5 or something. And honestly, if you go back to when it was passed, it was really, I think, saying women can be more than cheerleaders too, right?
Yes.
And you can actually be athletes, not just cheerleaders. And we're going to put money to it, and you have to give essentially equal level of time and funding for women's sports. And it was a big deal. It changed a lot of policies. I mean, I remember playing basketball that, JV, the girls and guys games, you couldn't put all the guys games at the prime slots and then make the girls play at 11 p.m. at night. There's like really subtle ways where the guys teams would get a lot of preference and it's all throughout. But what the Biden administration did, and please correct me or add nuance, but they basically took this sentence that says you can't discriminate based on sex. And they said, well, I know that for all of Western civilization and since the American founding, sex has meant the two sexes, men and women.
Yes.
But now we reinterpret it without congressional approval, just because we decided to change what the word means. It means every gender, which is an infinite number now. Where there's no, find me the person who could tell me how many genders there are. They don't, I'll find someone who disagrees. And then not only that, but sexual preference, like sexual
gender identity.
Gender identity. But isn't it also like gay and lesbian is part of that, or is that not part of it?
Well, when it comes to sports, it's specifically gender identity. So if a male is identifying as a female, then the Biden administration held that individual would be allowed to participate in the sports that align with their so-called identity and go into the intimate facilities that align with their so-called identity.
The locker rooms and things.
Yes.
Did you ever have to deal with that, California swimmer?
Thankfully not. I
can't imagine it.
I got so lucky, and I can't imagine. I mean, for my whole life, I dedicated my life to swimming and water polo, waking up so early in the morning for morning practice, after school going to practice on the weekends, doing homework in between my swim meet competitions. And just think about this. Of course, what happened under the Biden administration was unlawful, but it's deeply immoral.
Yes.
I mean, this is about dignity and safety and fairness. Secretary McMahon, to celebrate the 53rd anniversary of Title IX on June 23rd, went to New Mexico and participated in an event with the Independent Women's Forum, and she was up on stage with Peyton McNabb.
Yeah.
Peyton McNabb infamously was she suffered brain damage because a male on the opposing team spiked a volleyball in her face.
Yeah.
I mean, this issue, as I said, it's not just about the law. It's about decency and morality. To nerd out a little bit on Title IX, indulge me for a minute.
That's what we're here for.
Because the secretary had this fantastic idea to make June Title IX month, and she said we should really call to people's attention how historic Title IX was. Did you know that before 1972, there were only about 300,000 girls at the high school level participating in sports?
Okay.
As of a few years ago, I think the last numbers were done in 2021 or 2022, that number went up to 3 million girls in high school sports. Okay. Similar numbers at the collegiate level. We went from 32,000 girls to over 220,000 girls. Mm-hmm. And there were programs, and you alluded to this, like women's golf and women's rowing that were established at universities thanks to Title IX. The NCAA set a lot of women's championships starting in 1981. Just to make a comparison, the men's basketball championship for the NCAA was established in 1947. So we today in the United States as women live in this era where we think that this has always been the case. No, we fought so hard to secure these civil rights protections, and that was completely betrayed by the previous administration. And Secretary McMahon and President Trump are truly historic leaders in many capacities, but especially this one, because they're saying enough. We're going to restore these rights that are codified and were long fought for to provide safety and dignity and fairness to females.
Yeah, it's a trend of the LGBT movement that I've noticed is that every other movement before it that fought for some kind of representation or rights or equal treatment has been pushed aside for the transgender movement. So even movements that, maybe a lot on the right may not be very enthusiastic about, for instance, I'll just say, I don't want to allege a lack of enthusiasm for certain people's rights on the right. I don't know if that's really true, but it just seems to me that the trans man is more privileged in the modern left than the just feminist. Right, the average feminist. And so because of the way intersectionality works, you have to have a hierarchy of discrimination, of people who are more discriminated against than others. And then based on your level of how much you've suffered, you have more, should receive more rights, more preferential treatment by the government. I think a kind of coarse way of putting it. And since the LGBT issue, trans people are at the top of the hierarchy, above even people who were used to be at the top very recently, like gay men, are now pushed further down. And so I say all to say is that these rights movements have started sort of to cannibalize one another, and they're not sustainable because it's not really based in sort of an idea of human dignity or logic or biology. It's just based on the latest fad in the left. And so when the new one sweeps in, I think it'll take the next one. I think a logical extension of the way the Biden administration was treating gender, wouldn't it be that you could have like non-binary teams and leagues? Because the foundation of Title IX is that every sex has to be treated equally, every gender has to be treated equally, but we're still sort of operating in a non-binary model in all these schools. But based on their way of interpreting Title IX, it seems the logical conclusion that you could have a non-binary team and a Zer team, and every hundreds of genders, you could not tell a kid that just invented a gender that they can't be a part of their own team and equal to federal funding. And I just see I know it's like kind of very theoretical, but that's how I'm reading the logical extension of sort of the silliness and the way they were interpreting it.
Well, something that I think gets lost in this conversation, and I'm sure you would agree, and if you don't, feel free to chime in and disagree with me.
I'll preemptively agree and possibly revoke it later.
We're a free speech administration, open debate.
There you go.
But, something I think that gets lost in this conversation is that many of the trans-identifying individuals are really victims here. Mm-hmm. And this is where we can, delve into parental rights and what the department has been doing to protect parents and students' rights under federal parental rights laws. But, a lot of these individuals have been subjected to, gender ideology from the time that they were very little. And this really came to the fore, I think, during COVID, when for the first time, parents were really able to get a look into their child's classrooms because their children were Zooming school, and they got to see the kinds of things that were being taught and pushed upon their children, oftentimes without their knowledge. But many of these individuals are victims of this idea that has become in vogue that you can be born in the wrong body.
Right.
And Secretary McMahon hosted several detransitioners, young people who underwent a so-called transition and then thankfully got out of it.
Right. Not without effects, permanent effects, I'm sure.
Exactly. And she hosted them on D-Trans Awareness Day. I believe it was March 12th or March 13th. And she had this round table in her conference room at the department where she had 7 or 8 detransitioners. That was one of the most powerful things I've ever seen in my life. These young people were telling the secretary how this was pushed upon them in schools, how people who they trusted really betrayed them and kept their parents in the dark. And they said to her, we wish that we had an adult in the room who would have notified our parents and who would have stopped us. But this was inculcated into us and this was forced upon us. And as you indicated, many of them are living with the medical effects of their transition. I mean, this is horrific stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the big lies is that it's temporary or, well, we'll just try it. Just try these, drugs and things. And then if you change your mind or something, or if you're not sure, they treat it like an experimental period. But really, the moment you begin taking them, it changes your body, often forever. It can make you infertile. And of course, the surgeries are irreversible and pretty graphic and horrendous. And there's we've on a recent podcast, we talked about the financial incentive for hospitals and medical providers that was in place.
Oh, yes.
Because kids, they go on this, they're not just one-time surgery patients. So although that's very expensive, they're lifelong pharmaceutical need, and so there's a huge financial incentive. Now, the Trump administration is investigating a lot of those hospitals, partially because of that, and a lot of them are shutting down, which I think is encouraging and a good sign. But you mentioned parental rights.
Mm-hmm.
I've covered, I try not to be kind of sensational on this topic because I think there's enough of that, but I've been sensationalized or maybe radicalized or something on California's recent laws on this, where if your kid decides, if your 8-year-old is considering being another gender and maybe has a somewhat radical teacher because it's California and they're teachers, and maybe you have a blue-haired teacher who's in your kid's ear whispering, your 8-year-old's ear whispering that they should maybe consider, are they really a boy or a girl? And then they decide maybe they're not. And they confide in the teacher. They can go through an entire transition process at school and the parent never know. And the school has no, I don't know, maybe there's a legal conflict here, but California says the teacher has no obligation, or the school has no obligation to bring the parent into that. Is that true? I know there's some federal law that might conflict with that. Can you explain that?
Absolutely. So there are several federal laws, but the main one is FERPA, which is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And notice the F in FERPA, family.
Right.
And back in, I believe FERPA was passed in 1974. And actually, it was spearheaded, fun fact, by William F. Buckley's younger brother, Senator James Buckley. And he described this as really kind of codifying the civil rights of parents vis-a-vis the schools. Mm-hmm. And so it was happening even as far back as the 70s, is that a lot of schools, although this gender ideology stuff wasn't
invented yet.
Right, invented, exactly.
Yeah.
Not popularized yet. But schools were keeping this information that went beyond academic information, like, test scores or attendance. It actually went into the realm of keeping personality tests or psychological data on certain students. And so FERPA was passed in 1974 to give parents the right to inspect their child's educational records. So records that are maintained by the school and relate directly to the child. You, parents listening, you have a right to inspect your child's records. You have a right to know what, with certain exceptions, what schools are keeping on your child. Mm-hmm. And so fast forward to today, from day one of this administration, President Trump and Secretary McMahon have made this a priority amid rampant reports that school districts, for example, in Maine, there was a report that over 55 school districts had policies that said that if a child is deciding to go by a different name or take different pronouns, you have to get the student's consent before notifying the parents. I mean, this is patently absurd.
Yeah.
This is something that pertains to the emotional, psychological well-being of a child. And children do not belong to the government. Children belong to parents. And that responsibility and that privilege of talking about these very important issues lies with the family. It lies with the parent. It doesn't belong to government officials. And so what our Student Privacy Protection Office, SPPO, we have a lot of acronyms in the Department of Education. Our SPPO has initiated these parental rights investigations into Maine, into California, into Washington State. The Washington State one is a fascinating one if you want to talk about that. And seeing if there have been violations because of these state laws or these school policies or these district policies, which say that if a parent is not supportive of the child's so-called transition, school personnel may not disclose the new identity of the minor student to that student's parent.
Yeah.
So, again...
Well, what that means is that you're going to, as a parent, you say, well, parent, how can a parent not know? Well, the parent will find out, but they won't find out until the kid's been 3 years in the indoctrination.
Precisely.
That's what it is.
Yes.
So your kid will start transitioning at 8 at the hands of maybe some teacher or counselor who's woke or something, and probably through social media and whatever. And then you don't know about it really until it's too late. And they've been totally brainwashed because they're impressionable 11-year-old. And now they're wanting to get puberty blockers, and the doctor's telling you that if you don't go along with this, that there's a chance, your child may not want to be alive anymore. And it's just a funnel. And in California specifically, I want to hear about Washington, but in California, we've seen that if you don't go along with this, you can actually lose your child. And not only, they literally can take your kid away from you. And not only that, California has made themselves a sanctuary state for trans kids. And so if you're in Texas or, some kind of red state you think has good laws on this, the kid can flee to California and get the treatment, and there's nothing the parent can do about it. That's my interpretation of the California's recent laws. Is that fair?
Well, yes. So California passed this law, AB 1955, which has parts of it which say that, if a child is undergoing a so-called transition or adopting a new identity, you need to get the child's consent in order to disclose that identity to the parents. And if we just zoom out for a moment, if you look at different laws across our country, you need parental consent in many states to get a tattoo.
Yeah, of course.
Actually, it's a felony in some states if you provide a tattoo to a child without the parental consent. You need to be 21, as we know, to drink. Sir, I don't smoke cigarettes, so I don't know the age for that. But what is it, 16, 18?
20. I think it's 18 or 21.
Oh, okay.
I don't smoke either.
Good to know.
No.
But you get the point. I mean, there are so many examples here. But then you're telling me that a child can go by a different identity and possibly, get some kind of medical treatment without a parent knowing?
Right.
This is patently insane. So the investigation into California is to see if California has abdicated its responsibilities under federal law, namely FERPA, by abiding by state law.
Right. Okay. So that's what that is there.
Yes.
What's happening in Washington? Is it more egregious?
Oh, the Washington example is fascinating. So the Department of Justice and the Department of Education's Title IX Special Investigations Team is jointly investigating Washington State. And what happened was in 2022, there was a superintendent of La Center School District, one of the school districts in Washington, who had this pronoun policy which said that a teacher may not call a child by their certain preferred pronouns unless that child requests it or unless that teacher is corrected. So in other words, a teacher, according to this district's policy, may not go and affirmatively seek a child disclosing their pronouns. They can only follow the pronouns or call them by the pronouns if the child asks them to. A teacher at this district complained. It went to the school board. And the school board voted on it and actually sided with the superintendent of La Center and said the superintendent is correct here. These conversations really belong with the family.
Okay.
And the school board said if a child wants to go by a new name or new pronouns, the district must inform the parents.
Okay.
Then this went up to the state superintendent, which oversees all of the individual districts. And the state superintendent actually said that individual district was in the wrong and mandated that schools ask children for their pronouns, and crucially, that schools not disclose the so-called gender identity to the parents without the student's consent. So it's a fascinating issue because it involves an individual district's policies, the school board, and then ultimately, allegedly, the superintendent of public instruction for the whole state overriding those two and saying, no, you have to get a student's consent before disclosing the identity.
I have to imagine the teachers' unions are involved, those superintendent placements, but yeah.
But you can just see, I mean, in each state, there are these fascinating stories of how this is all unfolding, and Secretary McMahon is on top of it. She is such a fierce defender of parental rights. She sent a letter to all 50 state superintendents saying, children do not belong to the government. They belong to parents. You have to abide by parental rights laws.
I think it's going to take that. It's going to take sustained aggression and enforcement because,
yes,
it's not just this issue, not just Title IX. There's others, for instance, DEI on college campuses where there's sort of an order that went out. Some have started to comply, but a lot are ignoring it. This Title IX issue, my impression is a lot of these schools it's so entrenched that it's going to take a pretty aggressive approach from not just Department of Education, but these different offices of civil rights kind of working together to see a nationwide change. And these examples we're highlighting, I think they have to be just the beginning of several years of rooting this out because, I've interviewed other people on the podcast who talked about school districts. You don't realize how entrenched it is until you keep looking into it, but they spend millions of dollars to bring in consultants to educate the whole faculty, everyone on the trans stuff, on the DEI. They take money. We covered a report from Defending Education about how how many schools are taking millions of dollars that was allocated to help basically poor students because they're poor districts and help poor kids catch up. And instead of using that money in a common sense way, you might think like for tutors or something or better books, they funneled it to these consulting groups who come in and do workshops on kind of the worst of the woke movement. And so it's so entrenched. There's a lot of money behind it. And without sort of this aggressive approach that we're hitting on examples, I don't think it's going to come out. And then the other thing that you talked about, I agree with you that these are victims. And when I think about what we're going to talk about on the podcast and what you, our listeners, whoever should care about, we can't pick every topic. And I try not to get too passionate or angry or zealous on everything because sometimes we just have to be kind of nuanced and balanced and wise and weigh pros and cons, and maybe some economic policy has two good sides to it. But on certain things like abortion, like this issue, the 11-year-old girl who is being convinced right now to get a mastectomy can't speak up for herself. She cannot defend herself. It's evil. And I think if there's anything that I know about what it means to be a man in particular and to be the church, is we have to speak up for these people. And I get a lot of hate online and from different people, not from you listening, I know. The fans and great, but from people who say we're not loving, we're hateful. And that's the big pushback on this issue. I'm sure you've heard it. You're hateful, you hate trans kids, you don't accept people the way they are. But when you get into the details on this, you realize the most loving, compassionate thing you can do is speak the truth and save the next generation of kids from having a wave of puberty blockers that make them infertile, mastectomies where they can never nurse their child, other more graphic procedures I won't name here that irreversibly change them, that lead to higher rates of ending their own lives. By the way, the federal government's paying for it, and girls are losing scholarships, like who didn't have the same benefit you did of being, not having to compete against men. And so I'm glad that we're seeing some change on this, but I agree with you. This is a very moral issue, and we have to take back that ground because the opposition and the LGBT movement have for so long claimed they have the moral high ground and that they're more compassionate. They're the ones who are loving and accepting, and everyone else is hateful. So that's the end of my sermon. You can amen or you can add to it.
Amen.
There you go.
Very well taken and very well said. Yes. I mean, that's why I so admire individuals like Chloe Cole and Peyton McNabb and Riley Gaines and the several detransitioners who came to that roundtable with the secretary, these people who are willing to speak up about their experience, and they have endured such hate from people. Even at that,
it's incredible.
Oh my goodness! I mean, talk about hate, right?
I've never been really
being
persecuted
hateful
in my life until taking on this issue, actually. But keep going.
No, but if you're getting pushback, it actually may be a sign. I think it is a sign that you're doing the right thing, because if you're doing something noble in life, you're going to incur pushback. But the detransitioners who I mentioned, who sat with the secretary in her conference room, they were telling about how many people to this day will not speak to them, refuse contact with them, because they're coming out and saying that they were the victims of this horrible gender ideology. And for many of them, physically, as a result, they have damage for the rest of their lives, not to mention the psychological trauma of what they have endured. And they're the ones who are pariahs in their communities. It's insane.
Yeah.
So they have an ally in President Trump and Secretary McMahon. And I cannot say enough about the secretary. She is relentless. She will not back down on this Title IX issue. She will not back down on parental rights until this is permanently fixed to the best of our ability.
So what's next? We're kind of drawing to a close here. I think if you're listening, you're probably already believe or convinced that this is really bad for kids. It's bad for schools. It's a distraction. The money should not be used for this. It should be used for other things. And it seems like the tide is kind of turning on this issue. But as I laid out, with the schools that are ignoring it, the colleges that are ignoring it, there's still, I think, a lot of enforcement to be done. Is that all we need to look out for on this issue as we look to the next 6 months, year, 2 years? Are there pending court cases? Is there legislation that needs to come out? Or is it just kind of whack-a-moling all these resistant schools? What does the landscape looking forward look like?
It's a good question. All of the above. But to speak specifically about the Department of Education, we have dozens of open Title IX investigations and parental rights investigations. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we've concluded in the case of California that they violated Title IX and that CIF violated Title IX. Now DOJ is suing California. We concluded that Maine also violated Title IX and referred their case to DOJ. So the department is working as fast as possible to expeditiously investigate these alleged violations and then move it along to enforcement. So we're only 6 months in. I think this has been a historic 6 months in so many ways, but stay tuned.
Okay, stay tuned. Good place to end it. Thank you, Julie. Thank you for
Casey.
listening, everyone. It's been a great podcast, very educational. Please, if you're following us and you're not subscribed, you have to subscribe, like the video, comment, because we tell the truth and we don't shy away from topics, and we even don't refuse to use certain words. The algorithm's not our friend always. And so we rely on you to share, post online, post on your social media, email it out, text it to a friend. We need you to share and get the word out. And we're very grateful to you for listening. Like, subscribe, comment. This is the Outstanding Podcast. I'm Casey Harper. Julie, thanks for coming on.
Yes. Thank you so much. I was repeating my name.
Julie, good job.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Outstanding is a production of The Washington Stand, your source for news and commentary from a biblical worldview. This podcast is made in the USA by producer Casey Harper, production assistant Rachel Woods, technical producers David Salkeld and Yusuf Fletcher, and executive producer Jared Bridges. Help support us by texting the word OUTSTANDING to 67742 and read more at washingtonstand.com.